through the overview of the goals and the agenda for today. And then we're also going to have a preview of the plan for next year. So what do we want to accomplish? The end of this commission is June 30th. And so we just want to see what are the important topics that we want to cover for next year. And cannot tell you how grateful I am for everyone on this call, everyone on the commission, Bellwether and Nathan and Lou and the whole team has put in a lot to help us craft this report. And we've had a lot of really intense conversation, and it's really nice to see it in a final form for our second report and our first report that involves the strategic recommendations. I can tell you, and I think Glenn, you mentioned this earlier, I do think it's important for everyone on the commission to be having conversations in their communities or with their leaders, with the legislators, with anyone else that you think is relevant, and share this report and see what more we can be doing, especially as we move into next year. There are some specific topics. There was a survey that went out this week. There's specific topics that we will want to address next year that we pushed off from the report that was sent out earlier this week, the report 2. And so those are the topics that we will want to come to terms with, what we really want to dive deep in, because we want to ask people to come and share their expertise. We also want to hear from Lou. Lou was kind enough to show up at our last meeting, and we just plowed over him in our deep conversation. And so we really want to give Lou a little bit of time to share with us the results of the research that he and team did at THEC about the textbook costs per the request of Senator Lumberg. And then we invited Miss Amy Owen to join us to talk us through the EPPs. We had a lot of questions last meeting about educator prep programs, and so this is our opportunity to learn some more. With that, I probably just reviewed the agenda that Ms. Scheisse was about to review with us, so I apologize, Jen. But I will turn it over to you.
I'm more than happy to have you review the agenda for me. But good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be with you today. Just a quick overview of the reports that you have received. You got those earlier this week. Those are the final versions of the year 2 documents. They've been copy edited. They should be as perfect as they can be. There are 4 pieces to that. There is the report. There is the appendix to the report, which includes a lot of the research that underpins the recommendations. There is the ease of use document, which includes just a summary of the recommendations. It's the shortest version of the report, the one that Chair Scarlett was referring to in terms of outreach that you may be doing with folks in your communities. And then there's the year 1 addendum, which is the summary of all of the data that has become available since you all filed your year 1 report. So those are all in your inbox for your review and interest, but we are considering those reports final, which is very exciting. So congratulations to everybody on reaching this big milestone. And we are ready to move forward to our year 3 work. Kelly, can you go to the next one? So we have, as Chair Scarlett previewed, we have a few topics that we knew were outstanding that we wanted to cover in more depth. We just didn't have a chance to fully wrestle those to the ground as a group that we know we'll be digging into in our year 3 content. And we also sent out a survey to ask you for your input on any additional topics. We have, relatively few meetings in year 3 and a much shorter timeline to get the final report pulled together, and all of the work that you all have been doing over the last several months to get that year 2 report completed is going to have to be done on a much shorter timeline. So we want to make sure that we're planning really proactively for our time together in year 3. So the topics that were outstanding coming out of our November meeting is digging more deeply into school choice, digging more deeply into innovation, alignment between secondary and post-secondary, so high school and post-secondary options, curriculum outside of English, language arts, and math, the educator prep program data and accountability, which we will cover today. Thank you to Ms. Owen. Success metrics. So thinking about whether we want to identify success metrics for adoption of the recommendations that are in the report. We'll start talking about that today. We will not finish talking about that today, but want to get a sense of kind of where everyone's heads are at on that particular topic. And then prioritization criteria or guiding questions that you all may want to include in the year 3 report for consideration by policymakers as they think about these recommendations. In addition to those things that we knew about coming out of November, there have been a few additional topics that have come up through the survey. One is school accountability. Lots of folks are interested in digging more into that. Teacher compensation and benefits, and post-secondary course options, which is a pretty broad topic, and we're considering several things underneath that. Hybrid course options, what's required in post-secondary, how post-secondary course programs build towards certificates and degrees. So there's a number of kind of sub-questions under there. We also asked you about student engagement. I know that's been a long-standing interest of several folks on the commission. So wanted to get a sense from you all of what exactly you were looking for. We are actively working with other partners on the ground to plan something for you, and want to make sure that that is meeting your needs. So lots of folks interested in doing an optional site visit at some point in the spring. Most of you prefer to do that in person, and most of you prefer to hear from students at different stages in the education pipeline versus focusing on one. And you can see below there where the most interest is around talking, engaging with high school students, followed by TCAT students, followed by community college students, followed by four-year students. So we will be working with partners on the ground to arrange what will probably be a full day for you all, and we'll keep coming back to you as those plans develop. Any questions about any of this?
Jen, this is Glenn. Prior to getting into next year, I just want to understand what's the thoughts about sharing the report or referencing stakeholders to the website. When will the report currently be posted? Would we suggest they look at the Cliff Notes version of it? You know, what's the thinking about that, Jen, and maybe y'all's team's thoughts on that?
I'll defer to Nathan on when everything will be posted. But as far as, you know, what to share, I think we intentionally created the ease of use document as kind of an entry point because it's the shortest version. And then I think, you know, if folks are interested in digging more deeply into the rationale and more detail behind the recommendations, then you move to the report. The appendix is really for those who are deeply interested in understanding the research base underneath the recommendations. So I would say those are kind of the order of operations in terms of how it's shared. Ease of use, followed by the report for folks who are interested in a bit more detail, and then the appendix for those who really want to get into it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And, you know, Tara, I want to be sensitive to you. And I will tell you, we're in the process, Tara and I and Joey, of trying to get one-on-one meetings with the governor, lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House. We're hopeful, Tara, you know, tell me if I'm out of step here, but hopeful to get that in the next week or so. Is that correct?
That is certainly the hope.
Yeah, and so now, is it your desire to go ahead and post it, or do you want to brief them and then post it?
You know, I think it would be valuable for us to have a briefing with those individuals first. It just seems like the most logical path to me. But I also would leave it up to the group. If we all want to post it now, I think that's equally fine too. If we want to go ahead and start having these conversations in our communities and with our connections, because I do think there's you know, a good amount of information to share. So I will leave it up to the group.
But just for maybe what it's worth, and I'm certainly happy to take anybody's thoughts on it, because I, like the rest of you, are very interested in making sure that this is out available as early as possible. So we take it to the tail end of next week, and say if we haven't been able to meet with those principals by the tail end of next week, I wouldn't want to hold off any longer than that. I'd you know, if it looks, or they're telling us, well, I can meet with you, but I can't meet with you until the 20th or something like that, I'd sure want to go ahead and get it out there so that rank and file members of the General Assembly, as well as, you know, others can be processing it and thinking about it.
Well, then I think that's a good idea, Nathan. If there's no objections, let's go ahead and have it posted by the morning of December 10th. Does that work for everyone? Or let me ask a different question. Does that not work for anyone?
Well,
Is the question, I'm certainly in no hurry to go out and talk with people. I just want to make sure I understand the will of the group. It strikes me it'd be well to have it posted and just reference our stakeholders to where it's posted. They can get a copy of it. So
Yeah.
that's just my thoughts on it.
so Elizabeth Tullis are you still on with us, Elizabeth? She was giving me some sage advice, from the press side of it, that maybe we could put together a general press release and post that.
Highlight some of the big points we want to share with the public from the report, posted on the state board website, and publish that and the report simultaneously, and that can coincide or come after these briefings you're talking about.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
You reckon we'd still looking at the same dates there, Elizabeth? Because I certainly want to defer to your expertise on it. So.
Yeah, I would just need to steal some time from our bellwether friends for drafting the press release and getting their input on it, but I think that could be pretty easily put together in time.
Sorry to interrupt there.
Jen, is that cool with you?
Yeah, happy to help.
Excellent. Then Elizabeth, and you, if you wouldn't mind reaching out to Jen and Kelly and team and just moving that forward, and then plan on releasing that, I guess, next Friday
Okay, sounds good.
or Monday. Again, I'll go with Nathan, like whatever you think is makes the most logical sense.
I think Monday's a little fast, but Friday's definitely.
No, I mean, like, not next Monday, but if we publish this on the 10th, I don't know what the best time is to send out a press release, I guess is my point. If we publish the report on Friday, is it better to send out a release on a Friday or better to send a release out on a Monday? And that is not my world. That'd be your world.
Yeah, the report's dated, I think, November 30th, so I wouldn't want it to go too far out. So.
Yeah, I agree. As I see on our amazing video stream here, we've got 5 of our commission members, so I would welcome Casey to take roll, if you don't mind.
Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Dixon, Commissioner Gresham, Commissioner Chris Jones,
Hey,
Commissioner
Casey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Commissioner Gresham is with us.
Okay, very well. All right. Commissioner Yolanda Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Rothermel.
Here.
Commissioner Swift.
Here.
Commissioner Vaughn. Madam Chairman?
I am here.
Madam Chairman, you have 5 members present.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And with that, I would request that Mr. Nathan James read our statement of necessity.
All right.
Madam Chair, this is Dolores Gresham.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
just wanted to let you know I was present.
I'm sorry. I faded out on me there for a second.
This is Dolores Gresham. I just wanted to make sure that you knew I was here.
Yes, I see you and I hear you. So thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. Our statement of necessity for an electronic meeting pursuant to PC 792 of 2020, the Tennessee Commission on Education, Recovery, and Innovation. Eric, by and through the State Board of Education, hereby submits this letter as its determination of necessity for its meeting held via teleconference at 9 a.m. on the 3rd of December, 2021. Because members of the commission reside across the state, it was determined that a physical quorum of the members could not be assembled in Nashville for purposes of this meeting. As such, Eric met via teleconference to receive presentations and to finalize its work for the year. With the following members present. Notice that the meeting was posted on the State Board's website along with the agenda and instructions for dialing in. Respectfully submitted, Nathan R. James. All right, we're good. We're legal.
Thank you, Nathan. I think you could go a little bit faster in saying that.
Or
Speed talking. Thank you very much. And I believe I'll turn it back over to Ms. Scheisse. Is that right?
Yes, I just have one more thing to go over. So we've started to put together a high-level plan for our sequence of meetings starting today and extending through June. So just to share a bit, and obviously this will continue to evolve, but this is what we're thinking right now. Today we'll be talking with Amy Owens about educator prep data and accountability and begin our success metrics conversation, which will continue in February and April. Between now and the February meeting, we will be sending you content modules on some of the new topic areas, and we'll also be reaching out to you for one-on-one conversations in addition. So expect those scheduling emails to come out relatively soon. In February, we will be talking through content and recommendations related to the remaining topic areas. So similar to the work that we did in July and in August, but with far fewer topics. So it won't be anything like the marathon that you all engaged in those meetings. We'll also have some guest speakers to come talk to us about innovation. So excited about that. We'll do another round of independent work between the February and the April meeting, this time focused on the outline for the year 3 report. So if you remember back to what we were working on between our July and August meeting, it'll feel similar to that. Simultaneously, we'll also be tracking things that are happening in the legislative session that are related to the work of this commission and providing updates to you as is needed and relevant there. In April, we will talk through content and recommendations related to school choice. We will likely have some guest speakers. We have not yet determined who those folks are yet. We'll finalize any outstanding recommendations and talk about the year 3 report outline and get that finalized. And then we will enter the final report drafting portion where we will be drafting and iterating with you all one-on-one. On that report and hopefully coming together at the beginning of June to discuss feedback and make final revisions to that report. So that June meeting will feel like our November meeting. Just a note, as you probably guessed from the conversation at the beginning of the call around Kelly's different location, she's going to be going on leave in February, welcoming a new baby. And so you will be seeing a new bellwether face joining us in January as she transitions out and onboards a different associate partner who will be helping this work. So of course we wish Kelly well, we will miss her, but very excited for this new development in her family. And that is it for me. And I think I am turning it over to Lou to talk about the textbook study.
Is Lou with us?
He was with us earlier. I don't see him now, but Joey looks like he's joined.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Lou.
Okay. So, sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm in a Panera parking lot. Thank you, Senator Pody. All right. Just a quick update on the textbook affordability efforts that THEC has done in partnership with a lot of stakeholders around the state. As you know, Senator Lundberg reached out to us with a direct request to look into textbook affordability. We met with a number of stakeholders around the state and nationally around what are the major steps being done towards textbook affordability. And we really kind of came out with 3 findings. One, textbook affordability is about more than print and digital books. Just simply because of the evolution of what those textbooks look like. Second, high cost instructional materials really pose a significant barrier to student access, learning, and success. And then third, there are some significant cutting edge and innovative work happening here in Tennessee and around the country towards reducing the textbook cost for students. This work includes the development and use of open education resources, innovative payment strategies, and the use of Z degrees, meaning zero cost degrees, associated with open education resources. We did complete that work. Well, I should say we finished the first step in that work just recently and have submitted a report to Senator Lundberg and the Senate Education Committee. I believe that material is available to this commission. If not, I'll certainly forward that along and make sure that all of you receive a copy of it. I would just close by saying this is the first of many steps towards this conversation around textbook affordability. And happy to answer any questions. But again, this is the first step. Look forward to having future conversations.
Lou, would you mind forwarding that letter to the commissioners, please?
Absolutely, I'll do that.
Thank you. And thank you for the update.
No, absolutely. And I know that this commission also received an inquiry from Senator Lundberg. And I think that you'll find that the first round of information in this report really just scratches the surface of the iceberg. This is a huge effort, will require some ongoing efforts from all stakeholders, both public and private. And, you know, but we'll get that work done for sure.
So what are the next steps with that research?
So what we have done is THEC has really, we have a fellow on our staff named Ryan Christange. He has really taken on the mantle of textbook affordability for our agency. He is now the operational head of a statewide task force around affordability. All of our public higher education stakeholders are involved in that. We hope to include also some of our private partners around textbook affordability. They're looking at this from a number of different buckets. One, open education resources is an increasingly important bucket of opportunity, if you will, for building curriculum that can ultimately be affordable for students. We're also looking at what can be done in the realm of financial aid. That's a huge nut to crack because obviously textbook costs are pretty high and we have a lot of students. So our main focus will be on the open education resource, ultimately towards establishing a series of zero cost degrees that can also be leveraged as transfer pathways. That really is the first step.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lou. Did anyone else have any questions for Lou before he hangs out in the Panera Bread parking lot some more?
Lou, this is Glenn. Nice work there. I would also encourage you to think about books required for certificates as we get more and more toward industry focused certificates. What's the textbook cost for those as well? And I assume that can be carved out. The universities can carve that out as they look at their majors and minors to carve out that kind of work there.
No, I think you raise an excellent point, sir. I think one of the things that we've begun looking at is how do we embed course materials. Technology is a pretty amazing thing, and if we're not leveraging it to the full hilt, then shame on us. And I think one avenue of that technology is in fact the online platform, for course materials and learning management systems. So, that will definitely be a part of our conversation. It does enable higher ed institutions to embed that in a student's learning platform so that they have it on day one.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lou. Very much appreciate it. With that, Nathan, would you mind giving us an introduction of Ms. Owen before she shares her expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. So Amy and I have worked together for the last several years, and she's our Deputy Executive Director for Policy and Research. She's just about a PhD, just almost there, pretty quick she will be, in public administration. She's got a tremendous background in education. She's one of those folks who brings a kindness and a gentleness to this work, while at the same time never being satisfied until the correct information, the truth kind of comes out. And that's something I very much admire about her. She's done a very extensive work in terms of our, we have the educator preparation report card that we took over from the Higher Education Commission, which had done it as a courtesy to the board for many years, but about 2015 or 16, it came back to the board. And now we try to make it an excellent interactive tool, which I'll let her get into. But yeah, so this is soon to be Dr. Amy Owen.
Welcome, Amy. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, she's muted. Still not working. If worse comes to worse, you can come to my office. He's just down the hall.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. WebEx hates me. It usually does this. I have to like disconnect and come back in. I was just going to say thank you, Nathan, for the kind words. You're going to give me a big head this Friday morning, but I'm very glad to work with Nathan and our state board staff, and I really appreciate the invitation to speak with you all this morning. So as Nathan said, we're going to talk about educator preparation accountability, and I really appreciate this group's interest in this topic. It's something that my team has worked on for a number of years, as Nathan said. Today, we're going to go through the two types of educator preparation accountability we have at the state. Those are the State Board Report Card and the Department of Education annual reports, and I'm going to go over both of those. We'll have a brief overview of some recent policy changes that have also affected EdPrep, and I'll be happy to take questions along the way, but also at the end. That sound like a plan? Great. So this is a good bit of information, but it's important to understand that we look at EdPrep accountability in two ways. Both ways use the same underlying data set. So this is the exact same information goes into both reports, and it's based on the 3 most recent years of each EdPrep's completers. And what completers can include people who did a traditional undergrad program, got their degree and became teachers. It also includes job embedded folks, so who were in another career or who had a different major. It includes them at the point at which they get their license, which at many programs for job embedded is actually before they finish their coursework. So we count them because they are licensed educators affecting students, but we look at the most recent 3 years and we update this information every year for the public and for EdPreps. On the state board side, what my team works on is called the Educator Preparation Report Card. This is a high-level report. I'm going to show it to you on the web in just a moment, and it's designed for external stakeholders. We call this like the consumer reports of EdPrep. So you can look at all 40 EdPrep providers in the state and compare and contrast how they score on a number of different metrics. And we'll go into that in a little more detail. It highlights, when I say EPP, you all know that's EdPrep provider performance on key state priority areas. Some of those are defined in the statute that authorizes this report card. For example, we must include TVOS. We must include information about employment and retention. Other areas have been recommended by the state board over the years, including high demand endorsement areas. So are teachers getting licensed in subjects that districts are really, having a dire time trying to fill? And the racial and ethnic diversity of candidates, because research increasingly shows benefits for academic and behavioral outcomes for students when we have greater faculty diversity. It is a public accountability mechanism. It is not tied to whether or not you can continue being an EdPrep. We're going to get to what is tied to that in a moment. The EdPrep report card is required by statute, as I mentioned, and it must be updated annually by February 15th. Excuse me. So my team is currently in the process of reviewing the data, preparing it for this next update. A complementary report also comes out from the Department of Education that goes directly to the EdPrep providers. These are called annual reports, aptly named, and they are much more detailed. These are extremely granular reports so that providers can go in and not just see how did I do overall on teachers' level of effectiveness score, but how did my middle grades social studies educators do on the domain about questioning? So extremely, extremely detailed, and this helps EdPreps for their program approval process. It helps them for accreditation to have that data at hand, and it helps them for continuous improvement. The annual reports are what set the minimum bar for programs to continue operation. And if an ed prep fails to meet expectations on that report for 2 consecutive years, it triggers an interim review process where the department will go in and work with them on an action plan to address areas of concern. If that is not addressed, it could even lead to a change in approval status. It could lead to the department making a recommendation to the state board that perhaps they should go from being approved to conditionally approved, or having some kind of requirements to maintain approval. At worst case, even losing approval. The annual reports are required by state board rules. They typically come out in the late spring. So, Ed Prep report card, public consumer reports, annual reports go to each Ed Prep, used for ongoing operation and approval. Questions so far?
I have a question for you, Amy. This is Dolores
Yes,
Gresham. On the Department of Education annual reports, the bullet that says sets a minimum bar for programs to continue operation. Can you give me an example of one of those minimums? What would be a minimum?
Yes, I'll have to get into the different scoring mechanisms as I go through these reports. Essentially what you'll find is that on the Ed Prep report card, we tend to set a high standard for a program to be labeled as exceeding expectations, or really we're trying to spotlight those very top programs. For the annual reports, it's not that, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, but they are looking at there's 2 ways to meet most metrics. You can either get to an overall composite score, or you can be showing growth. So those are really ways to make sure that Ed Preps are either at the standard or they're improving. I can put in the chat box shortly a link that will go through each individual metric, but it's things like you have to at least have X percentage of candidates who are scoring at a certain level on their observation. I don't have those exact numbers off the top of my head, but it is not extremely low. I just mean like it's the basic level that you could have going forward.
Okay, I'll do a deep dive into that later, and if I have any more questions, I've got your number.
Yes, ma'am. And what I'll go ahead and show y'all now is the information about the State Board Educator Preparation Report Card. I have the link on the slide. Elizabeth, is it okay if I switch to sharing the website? Hopefully.
Share your screen.
Y'all see the website now?
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is what the State Board Ed Prep report card looks like. And you can see it's really, we're trying to make it user-friendly for potential candidates who might want to become teachers, for school districts who want to hire somebody, for parents who are curious about where their students might go. You can look at leader prep programs or teacher prep programs. I'm on the teacher prep page to start. So you can see we have a map of Tennessee with red dots for where we have each ed prep. And then we have our schools down this list. Now, usually we have another column here and it says their overall rating. Did they meet expectations, not meet expectations, or exceed expectations? Because of COVID-related data challenges, we did not assign overall scores last year. We did not have TVOS, we did not have teacher observations. So for this year and for the next issuance this coming February, we do not have overall ratings, but we have ratings on individual metrics that were not affected by COVID as much. So for example, I'll go into candidate profile and employment in a moment. But here are some features that someone could use. Let's say you want to go to a public school that offers a post-baccalaureate program in some sort of biology, perhaps. You could select that, and then you're going to get a filtered list of the schools that meet your needs. You could compare them. You could click on 3 and compare, or you could just click on 1 and learn more about that program. Here is information that the Ed Prep provided, some facts about the program, the endorsements they offer. This is their general information. how many teachers they've had over time in their cohort, and some more general information. What'll be more interesting for you all is this overall performance. Typically here where you see this orange-ish box, you would have their overall rating. Did they meet, not meet, or exceed expectations? But again, we don't have that due to COVID data challenges. You can see though, for candidate profile, employment, and candidate assessment, what their scores are. And typically this domain over here would also be scored. So I'll just give you an example for candidate assessment. You can see that Tennessee Tech exceeded expectations due to their high pass rates on both the pedagogical and content assessments. And you can see some disaggregations on which type of assessment candidates were taking in each area. Now, again, this is where the Department of Ed annual reports would be much more updated. You wouldn't just see that 89% of people passed their content assessment. You would see that 90% passed history, but 70% passed science, and I'm just making up numbers, but 100% passed elementary. So the programs can get much more detailed. Typically, we do have provider impact is where the most of our points are. We're still reporting the data, we're just not scoring it. So here you can see our usual scored metrics are the percentage of the teachers whose classroom observation scores are at least at a level 3 and then are at our level 4 or above. And we actually score those separately because we think that a level 3 is a very solid teacher. We also though want to put weight on teachers who are at a 4 or a 5 in their first several years, because that is a really big achievement for a new teacher. Speaking as someone who was a first-year teacher, it's hard to work on those really advanced goals and things when you're really getting a feel of how to manage the classroom. We have the same thing for TVOS, your percentage who are at least a 3, and then your percentage who are at a 4 or above. Typically, we score those first 4, and as you likely know, their overall level of evaluation is a composite measure that includes TVOS and observation. So we don't score this separately, but we do provide the data and a comparison to the state averages. I'll bounce back over to the PowerPoint in just a moment, but you can see that we also have leader prep, a state report, and general information available. So happy to take questions, but I think this is really something that if you all are able to share it out with your constituent groups, we're trying to make it helpful to both the ed preps and to folks who are interested in becoming teachers. So I'm going to stop sharing that for a moment, and I think hopefully you can see the PowerPoint again. Is that right? Great. Here's a written breakdown of what I was just mentioning, how many points each metric on the report card earns. We have an advisory council comprised of different ed prep faculty as well as stakeholders. We've had Senator Chairman Reagan on it. We've had advocacy groups on it. We've had district representatives. And every several years, they help us reset our point values, the weight that we put on these different things. As I said, this looks like it only adds up to about 50 points. Usually we score provider impact with 40 points. That is where we put our vast emphasis on outcomes. And the emphasis there is on TVOS because it's on student outcomes. This was paused, as I mentioned, but we will be looking to renew that in the coming years.
So Amy, I'm sorry, let me make sure I understand.
Yes.
Can you go back one slide? So this is the scoring framework. We have the profile, the employment, and the assessment. On the previous, when you look at the website, it talked about TVOS scores. Where does that fit into this?
It's in that provider impact domain, which was unscored this year. Typically it would carry, I want to say it's 25 points and observation is 15. But the provider impact domain as a whole carries 40 points. So it is really the vast majority of the report card.
So for the purpose of this committee, could you explain why that was unscored this year?
Yes, absolutely. When we had the 2020 spring testing canceled due to COVID, that meant that we did not have new TVOS scores generated. We also did not have teacher final observation scores calculated for that year. So we simply have a gap data year when all of our teachers, whether they were in year 1, year 2, or year 3, who would be on this report card, don't have any information available.
What about last spring?
So we are currently updating. We'll issue the report card in February. We will have new data from last spring. However, we all know that the 2020-21 school year was very significantly affected by COVID in many places. So we are not intending to provide an overall score again this coming year. That was based on conversations with our advisory council and with the state board subcommittee on educator preparation. But we are looking to reinstate that moving forward. It just won't be in this February's issuance.
Why does it take so long to get data? So
We
these
just
assessments were
this
done last
week.
spring, and it's now, you know, I mean, it's almost a year before producing this, and it would be published after the point people are making a decision of what school to go to, or
Yeah.
certainly from a recruiting standpoint. So help me understand why it takes so long.
We just this week got the teacher evaluation and TVOS data shared from the department. I know that there were particular challenges in this recent year. I believe there were delays due to the extended testing window in spring 2021, because again, districts were given a longer window in which to test to try to accommodate smaller groups. Previously, statute for this report card required it to be produced by November 15th, and it was always late because we didn't have the data. The board doesn't manage any of the data processes with all 15 of us on staff. But we actually Nathan worked with several legislators to get that deadline pushed back, so we were not just perpetually blowing by it. We use the 3 years, we use that 3-year data for consistency. So if someone was a 3rd-year teacher and they were only missing that 1920 data, we do still have 2 years of information on them, and we are reporting it out for public transparency. We didn't want everything to just be blank, so we're reporting the information. We're not scoring it, though.
Right. So not dissimilar to the K-12 environment.
Correct.
The teacher evaluations, though, can you help me understand that a little bit more? Because it's, again, from a time frame standpoint, I mean, it just seems like a long time from the time they were in school last year to now, and to make a evaluation.
I would defer you to the Department of Education. Probably Martha Moore is over our teacher and leader effectiveness. I believe we've got some of our friends from the department on the call who could probably help make that connection on what the timelines are for getting those scores finalized from the previous year.
Oh, okay. It strikes me that
Amy, on the
go on, Commissioner.
This is Dolores Gresham. Amy, on the prep programs, I know it's difficult because of the data gaps that we're experiencing, but can you say which of our prep programs stand out above the rest, either historically or currently?
Sure.
Which ones stand out?
Yeah, I don't want to leave anybody out, so I apologize in advance to any ed preps that I leave out, but typically programs that would get top ratings would be Lipscomb, UT Knoxville, Vanderbilt, Memphis Teacher Residency, Teach for America, Nashville has scored very well. Cumberland University has had some years of really good scores. I know I'm forgetting folks, I'm truly just going off the cuff. But what you really see that's interesting is that providers can have different strengths in different areas. Some of them struggle to get completers interested in their high demand endorsement areas. So perhaps they're very low on their candidate profile score, but the teachers that they produce pass their assessments, they get placed in a district, they're retained, the districts really appreciate them. So you might even see within a single ed prep, one domain does not meet expectations and another domain exceeds expectations. And that's really where we're hoping to help our ed preps think about how can they learn from each other. If they're saying, you know, Tennessee Tech, you're hitting it out of the park on people getting retained for 3 years in the classroom. I really want to grow on that as my ed prep. How can I talk to you about what you do? And maybe we can have a conversation where I help you on thinking about some of your issues and areas to grow. I will say this is something that has a lot.
So is there a system by which the programs, the different universities share best practices? NCTQ several years ago did a complete survey, and out of the top 5 in the country, Lipscomb and Vanderbilt were listed in that top 5 as far as quality educator preparation programs. You would think that, you know, we would go across the street and talk to those folks about what exactly they're doing. But is there a system for sharing best practices, or do they just do that on their own?
That's a great question. It's both. There is a very robust professional community. It's called TACTE, the Tennessee Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. They have conferences twice a year that are very, very practical. They'll have sessions from EdPreps on how they've increased pass rates on the math and science practice, or how they've increased their diversity on campus. It is a very tactical group. You know, sometimes conferences can just be very theoretical, but they are very, very focused on how to improve. We also at the state board try to leverage our state data to help make decisions. We have had research fellows who have done qualitative interview projects calling up EdPreps that have had significant improvements in one or more domains to find out what they did, and then put together reports that we present at TACD and post on our website. We've also used this data to inform policy decisions, especially about which assessments to use in different areas and what appropriate cut scores are that are connected to more positive student outcomes in class. So we truly have a wealth of data here. We have a very good arrangement with the department, which collects all of this data, which does take time. It takes time to link it to the individual candidates, but we want to make sure that the data that underlies this is as clean as it can possibly be, because both agencies are making decisions and doing research based on it, and our EdPreps are making decisions as well.
Amy, this is Glenn Swift. First of all,
Thanks,
thank you
Amy.
for being with us. Question for you. Our charter around ERIC is around connecting education with careers. And thinking about all the tremendous data that you have, how do we best do that? What are the key metrics that if I were in industry and I'm looking for someone in supply chain, for example, how could I best go convey it? And I'm sure you do this every day with industry that's looking to come to Tennessee, but how does that process work today, and what are the key metrics for that?
Well, you're very kind. I'm afraid you're overestimating my role and capacity with career pathways. I know that that's a lot of what the department's CTE team and Tennessee Pathways does, is looking at the industry more broadly. Our focus here is really on the teacher workforce, but I think there are some useful lessons here, because we have other states call us up all the time. We were just talking with California has talked to us. We've talked to Kentucky before. We've talked to Delaware. Many, many different states have said, how are you able to take your teacher prep data and then track it to where you know where they got a job, and then you know how they did in their first 3 years in the job? Tennessee is unique in having those data linkages and having them available at the state level view. And it's not just something that's kind of cool for us really wonky folks. This actually helps EdPreps in their accreditation process. They need to show this data and show evidence of their outcomes to their accrediting bodies for program approval. So we have it all in one place. They're not having to try to go track down, you know, where did Miss Smith get a job and is she still there 3 years later? We are able to provide that. So I think the teacher labor market and the way that we make these connections could have some useful implications for industry overall, but I'm not involved in that work beyond education.
And also, how do you, as an organization, connect with TCATs and the universities to, as Bill Fox tells us, a lot of changes are coming in our industries out there. And if we're preparing people to be automobile mechanics, we're probably going to find that's a dead-end job, for example. So how do you connect back with industry, and then also connect back with the universities and the TCAT? Well, here's the thing, here's what changes are coming. So I'm kind of interested in that whole area of how that's done.
Gotcha.
And how we measure that.
Yeah. Nathan, do you have any thoughts? I know you're on a number of committees about career pathways.
Yeah, they're definitely so. So with, you know, with the state board, we're kind of a bit of we try to be a small and mighty team, you know. In some ways we try to be the little agency that could. And that means I sit on a number of different sort of task forces and panels to represent our position. And it's so The short answer is we try to, within what it is the board does in terms of the creation of and approval and all of that, of the academic standards and things like that, to move more towards what is most useful. I think that a lot of that has been done in terms of the math curriculum, for example. You know, there are any number of students who run into problems following sort of that algebra track at the high school level. And of course, if they're not really going into a STEM field, it doesn't tend to translate to all of that necessary. Whereas you know, things like the statistics have. I think actually that this commission being administratively attached to the board is perhaps the legislature's way of trying to push some of those issues to the forefront. I mean, Glenn, exactly what you're getting at is one of the largest challenges of education, and in that you have this business of separation between, you know, K-12 funded here, it's right here, this bunch is in charge, right? And then you've got TCATs are here and they're sort of higher ed, but they're not always roped into everything. And then the community colleges the same way, they've got their mission. Whereas some of the things that have come out in our most recent report actually are saying, hey, education world, blend these things together, because we're in the business of trying to make responsible citizens who can pay their own bills, think for themselves, and kind of secure this republic into the future. And so I think that's why some of that work is tremendously important. The short answer is a bunch of committees, a gazillion different conversations in the course of years, and not occasionally, but often finding ways to put those things together in terms of what policies come out. So there's a whole lot of partnerships.
Yeah, and Nathan, this is Glenn. I clearly understand the complexity of this. Well, maybe I don't fully, but I'm not trying to solve that. I'm just trying to solve what it takes to take our citizens and connect them with gainful lives and careers. And so how do we measure? At least we ought to be able to figure out, and I know that's coming next on our agenda, how do we measure, inspect what we expect? So that's really aiming my question around here. Who have got that data? How many of this is resulting in jobs? I come from the University of Tennessee, so I fully understand a lot of the things that you're talking about here. But how do we do that? And what are the key metrics that we can measure there? So I kind of think of ERIC as kind of a skunk works, if you would, go back in history of organizations, and they kind of stuck us together over here, 9 people, and we can't really talk a lot among ourselves, but that's okay. But you know, come up with measure, you know, look at this whole situation. How do we do that? How many jobs are who's got to handle how many jobs are created and filled with Tennessee citizens, or how many are not filled? Anyway,
So
Those might be questions for Department of Labor or Economic and Community Development.
yeah, but so Glenn, I think honestly what you're getting at, I mean, this is so I take off the hat that I wear with the State Board of Education and I put the one back on that I was once a policy advisor for education and the workforce, and that meant working with labor and workforce development, right? And always what's the term they use, the SIC to SOP, the credential versus the job that it goes to, and that's exactly what you're getting at. You know, and you can't take, obviously the question you're asking is considerably more broad than exactly what is in this report card, right? What you're kind of getting at is what can the state do to incentivize the production of credentials that actually lead to productive employment, right? I mean, that's what you're getting at. So
I'm trying to replicate what we did with Ford, what's going on with Ford, and we will prepare the citizens to be gainful employees of Ford,
right?
Memphis, for example, with the skills they need to be successful.
And I think, you know, I think honestly, when there's a place to get to, and I'm going to hush and hopefully Dr. Yolanda Jones will speak up on this, but you know, there is also this issue of the higher education funding formula. And, you know, we have the nation's only outcomes-based funding formula, but then the question becomes, does that incentivize graduation in any and everything, or does it incentivize graduation in fields that are actually immediately employable?
Right.
And you know, and I think Yolanda may be able to speak to some of that, or if Lou is on, he could. But that sounds to me like where you're wanting to go, if I'm hearing between the lines.
Thank you, Amy, for indulging me in that conversation. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure we're producing the kind of citizens that industry needs and
My
wants.
pleasure. And we,
And I'm sorry, Glenn, and for some reason I'm having a problem hearing you. I'm not sure why. I can hear everyone else, but I'm having a problem hearing you. I'm sorry.
Apologize. I kind of speak a little softly, I guess. So I also carry a little tiny stick, so I'm not a.
well, if it's all right with y'all, I'm going to go ahead to the department's
Sorry, Amy,
Yes, ma'am.
I have several questions / comments before we move
Okay.
forward. And this is touching on a variety of things that Dolores mentioned and also that Glenn mentioned.
Yes.
One being that, you know, we're talking about EPPs right now. We're not talking about bringing in anyone that has industry credentials to be able to help inspire students. And I know that's historically been a bit of a challenge, but as Glenn is talking about, how do you ensure that our students are able to walk into potentially high growth jobs? There's certainly opportunity to bring individuals who do not have to go through the process to get into those roles without it being too extreme. Do you have any insight on where we are?
Yes, I actually can talk about that. I was going to talk about it a little bit in a few slides, but we've gotten into this in a number of ways in recent years. So we actually have 2 districts that have become ed prep providers for the purpose of occupational teacher certification. And that was a lot of jargon. Basically what it means is that these districts, it's Rutherford County and Knox County, can do the job that an ed prep typically would, to take someone in their community who is an expert in their career field but wants to become a teacher, get them certified, and get them in the classroom, all through the district without having to go to the ed prep. And that's for occupational CTE areas, which are our more hands-on CTE subjects. So that's something that's just come out in recent years, that districts are able to do this, and Knox and Rutherford are leading the way. Rutherford is actually on the ed prep report card now. You can see how their candidates from their first couple years are doing. So that's one option. We do also have programs like Grow Your Own, which help take individuals in a community and help them become teachers. It could be someone who's a high school student who connects back to their existing school district that they went to. Could be an educational assistant. There's a number of ways there. We also have a couple of unique programs. There's an adjunct instructional license that is underused, but it lets someone teach for up to 5 years, up to 2 or 3 courses at a time in their career field. So that's if I'm a retired engineer and I just want to teach a couple classes a year, you can get an adjunct license. There's a license for post-secondary educators. So if you've taught at the higher ed level, you can obtain a 9 through 12 teaching license in that subject. We have actually more creative pathways than you'd think. I think the difficulty I usually see is making people aware of them and helping them understand how to work through that process when education jargon is not their native language.
What is I've heard some horrendous stories about people coming out of industry and wanting to go back to teach and having to get these credentials, and then the process is just obscenely long and ridiculous. Can you just give me a time frame or an expectation that industry leaders
It would vary, to be honest. It would vary based on whether the person already has a baccalaureate degree or if they're coming in with a high school degree, which they can do in occupational areas.
I would say, just for giggles here, majority of people that are in industries that are growing probably at this point have
a BA.
some sort of baccalaureate program.
So they can be issued, they can begin what's called a job embedded program, where they're enrolled at an ed prep and they are also teaching full-time, and they get their license on the front end. So they get their license when they're enrolled in the ed prep. And then their teaching classes, they are the teacher of record. And it varies by what previous coursework the person had and the EdPreps program. It could be a year-long program where they're teaching during the day and having classes in the evening. I think a lot of them start one summer, go through the year, and then finish through the following summer. But yeah, I mean, there are ways to get them a license in fairly short order for that job embedded route.
So you're asking them to take the praxis test and then stay in an ed prep program in order to be able to teach, even though they might have 20 plus years in industry.
It is required by law that teachers pass an assessment of pedagogy and content knowledge. And I think Nathan is aware of some potential incentives that may be coming out to help reimburse candidates for that. Do you want to talk about that, Nathan?
I'm happy to, because it was made public on the floor of the Senate last year. Towards the tail end of session, we were able to work out a deal between the House and the Senate on a particular bill that dealt with teachers taking some of these alternative pathways. And we got a public commitment on the House and the Senate floor that this year the authors of that legislation would bring forth legislation to begin picking up the cost of the praxis exams for teachers. Oftentimes that's cited as, we don't want to make them take the praxis. Yet at the same time, I mean, you've got a couple of competing concerns here, right? You want to make sure that the subject that a person is teaching, they're actually knowledgeable about enough to do that. And Senator Gresham can tell you a dozen stories where we had bills in front of the Senate Ed Committee. One time it was, if the teacher can actually pass the final exam for the course, then they'd be able to teach that. And that was considered, told by some teaching groups that was insulting to the profession and all of this kind of thing. And so there have been a lot of different attempts to try to solve for this, while making sure, on the one hand, that the person definitely knows their content and that they have the ability to teach it. In terms of the innovation stuff that this commission looks after, there are a number of these things that exist on paper, but have never been publicized, like never talked about. For instance, you can teach adjunct at a university or community college and be eligible and get licensed to teach the same subject for high school. I think there's been 2 people, maybe 3, that have done that since the late Senator Somerville passed that law about 10 years ago.
So I feel like this conversation go on for a while. I have a strong belief, and based on what other people are telling me, is that we're expecting to see a really large exodus of teachers from the education field in the next few years. If that comes to light, we already have a massive deficit of teachers in role. I just wonder if we have too many regulations in place that will potentially support people that might be coming out of retirement to want to be able to go teach. And it's not an insult, because I can tell you, you can go to a high school, you're not going to be able to find an industrial engineer that works there. They won't be able to understand what an industrial engineer does, or any other large profession, because they've never worked there. They can teach some of the basics. So I think that I would encourage us as a commission to have a broader conversation about how do we think about filling some of these teacher gaps, and thinking about breaking down some of the regulations that are impeding people from actually walking into the fields and supporting the students' growth and inspiration for careers, per Glenn's comment. But I do want to move on to another question I have, and this is tied back to the EPP. So this has taken us back a good 5-10 minutes, right? And I have 2 questions here. One question is, Amy, so in my exploration of leadership programs, principal programs across the state and even across the nation, there's not a lot about coaching and guiding teachers. It's mostly instructional, right? And some of the best performing schools have excellent, high quality leaders that are coaching and guiding teachers to be even better teachers. You mentioned earlier the teacher evaluation, and that's a 1 through 5 scale, if my memory serves.
Correct. Yes,
What
ma'am.
percentage of teachers get a 3, 4, or 5? That'd be one question. And my second question is, how are we sure that the principals who are not learning this in their preparation programs are really aware of how to help coach, guide, and evaluate teachers to be the best teachers they can be?
Those are great questions. So I'm looking back at the state report. Keep in mind that this is looking at the most recent 3 years of new teachers. So I'm talking about the people in their first 3 years. On the last report card, 94.2% of them scored at least a level 3. 55.1% scored a level 4 or 5.
I'm sorry. 90% of them scored a level 3?
94.2%. And I think
The overwhelming majority of the teachers, I mean, clearly almost 100% of the teachers received a level 3 score.
And those are in their first 3 years in the classroom. So I'm not looking at people who've been in the field for 20 years. I will say it is a topic of conversation among board members and our staff and our colleagues at DOE. The team evaluation system has a number of strengths, but we have also had it in the state for about 10 years, and we have seen inflation. To be really candid. And so that's something that we're looking at researching with our partners at organizations like TARA, the Tennessee Education Research Alliance, to identify what have been the trends over time. How are they connected or not connected with growth in student outcomes? Are all of the metrics ones that are still relevant? Are there things we should be considering, like teaching in more of a virtual space? So I see where you're going, and we're there as well.
Okay. When will Tara have that report?
It is still it is nascent. They have a number of different projects that touch on this, but the overall look at it, I don't have a timeline
Okay.
for you.
That's fine.
I would encourage you, if that is something that you all decide that you're interested in, perhaps you could have come to some recommendations or specific questions you want to see answered.
And we could reach out to Aaron O'Hara over there. The second question along the same lines when it comes to the educator prep program, how do you, if you were to approve a school, like what metric, like what would be, is there a number one metric to say, this is what metric we'd want to use to approve X, Y, and Z school? And I'm just leading you forward. Perfect.
Yes. So we have a very long process laid out in rule for how an ed prep gets approved initially. They get a 3-year initial approval. And then after that period, we look at their data and then they can enter into a 7-year approval cycle. We used to just say, hats off, 7 years, see you next time. What the department has really built out with the annual reports in recent years are a regular checkpoint. So we don't get 5, 6, 7 years down the road and realize that things have really gone off the rails. We're looking at every provider in detail every year. And this goes back to what I talked about earlier, where it can trigger an interim review. And I am going to answer your question. I'm getting there kind of with the second major bullet point. The department looks at 5 domains on the annual reports that are listed here. You'll see those are very, very similar to what we score on the report card. If a provider doesn't meet expectations on 2 domains, or if they don't meet expectations on level 5 alone, which is completer effectiveness, so TVOS, observation, LOE, then they do not meet expectations. So the one that is really, truly important for program approval on a continuous basis is that domain 5. In terms of initial approval, before they have any data about them, we're looking at things like what's your plan for what endorsement areas are you going to build out? What's your expertise in those areas? How are you going to track data? Do you have district partnerships? Those are more when someone is starting a new ed prep or wants to add a new endorsement. That is much less common than this regular review cycle that we look at every EPP.
That is super helpful. How often do we, I guess 2 questions. One, do you think this is the right process? Do you think there's something that should change? And 2, how often are EPPs closed down for not reaching the goals you set for each of these domains?
I appreciate the first question. It's rare that we bureaucrats get to like dream a little bit. I think that it's been really helpful to have 2 separate processes, that the boards is more about how do we look at these and talk about them publicly. and the departments is more focused on what are our baseline expectations and how do we get that data back to ed preps. When THEC was very kindly producing these reports for us before we had some research capacity, it was a single report that tried to be all things to all people. And it was extremely challenging to understand. It was it was like a 300-page PDF. When we have others, like I mentioned, we have other states calling us up. This is one of, if not the most rigorous program approval processes in the country. It is state of the art in terms of how data are connected and then how data are shared back with EPPs, the level of granularity they can get to. We are not aware of other states that produce similar levels of reporting every single year for ed preps. It's much more common that they get 5, 7, 10, some year of approval, and it's good luck to you until next time. We do not often close programs down. It is much more common that they will be put on probation and have a pretty intensive corrective action plan where department staff are meeting with them regularly. They are tracking outcomes. They are trying to see progress. In some cases, that might lead, especially, we have seen this more commonly with smaller colleges, they might decide that this isn't where they can spend their resources. And it's really unfortunate because, as you all know, we need more teachers, but as Nathan mentioned, there's a tension between needing more teachers and needing high quality, well-prepared teachers too, not just anybody in the classroom. So that's something that I do want to emphasize, that this is a very reflective and iterative process, and it is something that other states really don't have available to them.
One last question. Are there any states that are doing this better than us? So
It's a good question. I don't know as much on the annual report side. Michael Derline at the Department of Ed would be best to answer if there's anybody that's like a vision for him of what he's trying to get to, but I am not aware of it. From the report card, I think we struggled even before COVID because we would have years where testing didn't occur or there was some sort of irregularity, and then some teachers might invalidate or nullify their scores. So I think we've had a couple ongoing data challenges that I'd love to resolve, but we did some stakeholder interviews in 2018 with ed prep provider faculty, but also their current students on, did they understand the format of the report card at that time? And was it information that would have helped them make a decision about where to go get their ed prep degree? And we used that to do a pretty comprehensive redesign to make it more user-friendly. So I think with every metric, frankly, there's a way that you could nitpick it. You could say, well, my ed prep is not in a very diverse area of the state. I struggle to get racially and ethnically diverse candidates. Or I'm a small program. I don't offer some of those high demand endorsement areas. Or I'm, very prestigious four-year institution. Most of my folks go to grad school. They're not getting a teaching position right out, and that's getting me dinged. So I think with no metric is perfect, but the research really shows the importance of using mixed methodologies to evaluate ed preps. And I think we've got some strong ones that are important to state priorities. And we're going to continue looking at that moving forward. We're thinking about how to, particularly in the area of literacy, how to emphasize those candidate assessments on literacy for teachers who teach reading. Always looking to evolve and improve, but I look at these a lot. Erica on our staff looks at this a lot. There's not like some other states report or information where we're going like, dang, if only we could be like such and such. This is we feel confident in what we have while we continue to look to improve. Thank you. That is really where I was going to go. We have a few recent policy changes. I think we've really covered a lot of these. In 2018, the department began implementing required literacy standards for ed prep. The special session legislation in January is making some updates to those.
Let's make it clear what we're talking about there.
Yes, so literacy standards are, it's essentially the expectations for how ed preps will teach teachers to teach reading. Got teach a lot in that sentence.
All of them. So they're pretty strong too.
It's for elementary, middle, special ed, ESL, and school leaders. So everybody but really the content specialist high school folks. We've streamlined pathways for out-of-state educators to obtain and renew their Tennessee license. Our friends in the General Assembly assisted with some statutory changes there. We have additional programs to add endorsements through the department, through LEA programs. And I know the department has a number of grants going on to support EdPrep innovation and bringing more people into the profession and helping continue to advance those who are in the profession. I know Michael Derline is also on from the Department of Ed, so if you have any questions, Elizabeth is able to promote him, but let us know.
Do you have any other questions for someone?
I do want to give a shout out. Our ed preps work very, very hard, all of them. And there's over 40, and they're all extremely different, from small religious institutions to large publics to alternate pathways. They're a collaborative bunch. They don't hesitate to make their feedback known because these reports do reflect on them, and we all understand that. But they continue to push us to make these better and to say, how can we get more information? How can we drive our program? This is what we really wish we could see. Can you get us insights into this? And we appreciate their partnership very, very much.
Hey, Amy, this is Glenn. I can't pass up an opportunity, one, to thank you for being with us and especially educating me on the rigorousness that you have and understanding. My observation is we're moving towards a direction that says one size doesn't fit all of our million students, and that we're going to need some really tight collaboration between the different people that are working on education. And I'm amazed at how many there are, by the way. So that just comes from an observation. But I think we now have to come up with some flexibility. And I guess I was struck with one of the top-notch teachers in the state, I was told, that I interviewed as a stakeholder. And her observation was, Glenn, we appreciate you thinking about, I asked her about innovation and creativity. And she said, we try to shy away from that because when you do that, you're not always right. And when you're not right, we're going to get penalized. And so I guess it's just a plea that says, I don't want us to come up with some unintended consequences that people can't implement what we're recommending. But
I'll give you,
can't get down the path we're going down right now. Yeah.
I'll give you an example of something that we actually just changed on the report card that was an unintended consequence. We used to score the number of candidates that had reached a certain level on their ACT or SAT, and programs were able to admit candidates who didn't get to that level if they felt like, they have a good undergrad GPA so far, we're going to be able to get them up to passing their licensure assessments, we can work with this student. They would actually be penalized for taking that risk and for taking on those students that maybe were from a historically underserved background, that may have been candidates from more diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, is what they often reported to us, that they felt like, this person from their high school experience wasn't very well prepared, but we really think we can get them to the next level. But every time we take on one of those candidates, we get dinged on this really public report. And so we actually worked with our advisory council to remove that as a scored metric, because we didn't want to give the impression that ed preps were doing something wrong by trying to grow these people even further. But that's a great example of an unintended consequence that was made with a good intention of saying, well, we should have these high entrance criteria, when really what we want to focus in on is what are their outcomes with students, regardless of where they were when they started college.
And lastly, I would just observe there are trends that we're looking at. One of those is a tremendous amount of talented people that are retiring from industry or working that would love to give back to their young people today. And we need to find ways, perhaps the dean of the school or the president of the school could approve kind of again, we don't care anything about being on tenure track. Don't worry about that. We have no desire to be a tenured person. But we just want to give back to students, and we realize our backgrounds has to be certified, but just be, I'm not sure if our committee will come up with something like that, but that's a bias that I have, that we have a lot of talent out there that would like to be productive in the education world. Tara, with that, I'll be quiet.
I agree with you. I won't belabor the point. my balance is that I want to set them up for success because there's so much that goes into teaching beyond knowing your content. There's knowing how to work with students with disabilities, how to lesson plan, how to look at assessment data. So I do believe there needs to be a balance of that pedagogical piece along with your existing content knowledge. Great. Well, that is it from me. You all, you can welcome to get in touch with me, email me directly, go through Nathan, whatever you prefer, but I really appreciate your time and invitation this morning.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I guess I need to turn it back over to
Yeah, we'll shift
Dr.
next,
Foster.
into the conversation about success metrics, but I think we have time if we want to take a 10-minute break, come back at 10:35. Does that work?
Works.
All right, see you all at 10:35 and we'll dive into metrics.
Sherry, you're muted.
I'm glad I'll just keep talking about mute, not who's on the call, and who's not. I see Dolores. Glenn is not back yet. Joey, welcome. Like the beard. Yolanda and Frank is not back yet. Frank is going to be ducking out in just a second. I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay. Sounds good. So we're going to spend the next hour and a half or so talking about success metrics. So just a quick reminder, toward the end of our November meeting, we were talking about identifying some metrics to help the legislature measure the success of any recommendations from the year 2 report that they choose to implement, and to kind of help the legislature start thinking about how to prioritize among the 50 or 60 some recommendations that are included in that report, making sure that the ones they're choosing are very directly aligned to whatever success metrics you all recommend them kind of holding as the end goal. And so we're going to start this conversation today. Want to be really clear and kind of set expectations from the outset that we are not planning to come to any sort of alignment on what those metrics are. We're not taking a vote. We've kind of planned a 3-meeting arc to give all of you time to do research, to engage in conversation with one another, and to kind of continue to have a little bit of time in between meetings before making some of those decisions, before completely aligning on whatever set of metrics you all recommend to the legislature. So that table at the bottom of the slide there just kind of outlines what we're thinking about this arc looking like. It may continue to evolve depending how far we get today, and then again in February. But today we are going to revisit the what success looks like conversation that we had, if you think all the way back to May, in our first meeting, Bellwether's first meeting with you all. We had a conversation about what you all see success looking like if the year 2 report and the year 3 reports are successful. We're going to look at some existing state metrics in Tennessee and kind of have a conversation about, based on what already exists, where do you all want to go from here? And start to thinking about some of the categories for metrics that we want to align on. We'll pick this conversation back up in February, start reviewing, discussing, and narrowing some draft metrics in each of those categories, and then in April, aiming to kind of vote on that last set of metrics. So again, want to set expectations that we are not voting. We are not going to bring this conversation to full closure today. This is really part 1 of 3 parts. All right, so if you think back to May, which feels so long ago now, but one of the very first things that we did was ask you all to start thinking about a definition of what success looks like if Eric's vision is realized at the end of your time together. And we came up with 2 sets of criteria. So one is at the individual level. So success looks like individuals who are lifelong learners, as measured by things like certifications and degrees achieved. They're individuals who are able to gain employment in a field related to their field of study, and they're earning a livable wage that can support a family. They also have dignity, a sense of self-worth, and can make choices about their employment and about the way that they're living their lives. They have critical thinking and teamwork skills and are good citizens, measured by things like voting, volunteering, and ability to be self-sufficient. On the system level, then, a successful system would be tied to current student needs. It would be student-centric and serving all students. It would be nimble, flexible, and adaptable, and also hospitable to families. Any questions about this? Is this sort of feeling familiar, bringing it back a couple of months later? Thumbs up from Glenn. Awesome. All right, so with that context, oh yeah, sorry, did I hear someone? No, okay. With that context, we did a little bit of research ourselves to understand what goals Tennessee already has in place as it relates to education and workforce. I think one of the questions that I'll be asking you and that we'll be talking about is the extent to which we want to kind of raise up some of the existing metrics versus creating new ones. And so on the elementary and secondary front, the Tennessee ESSA plan, that's the plan that the state put together for the Every Student Succeeds Act, has a handful of metrics that are in place with the goal and date of 2025. So 75% of third graders will be proficient in reading. 75% of students who are learning English will meet the appropriate growth standard on the WIDA Access, which is an English language proficiency assessment that those students take. Tennessee will receive a 50% reduction in the number of high school students who are not meeting the on-track or mastered level on the state's subject matter assessment. So math, English language arts, and science. And you can see there we have some baseline metrics from the 2015-16 school year with the end goal then by the 2024 to 2025 school year. Quite a bit of a jump there in those goals. And then Tennessee will reach a 95% four-year adjusted cohort high school graduation rate for all students.
So just commentary on this, Kelly, maybe Dolores might be able to feed into this a little bit. This plan was put together under the previous administration. I have not heard the current administration come out with these goals in a public fashion. So although it was published with the ESSER plan originally, I don't know how does that roll with where we are today if the current administration is not talking about this? I don't know the answer. If anyone else has a perspective on that.
Yeah, I don't know if I know the answer either, Jen. Feel free to jump in if you do. I mean, I think they still exist, right? But if they're not being held up as what the state is driving toward, I think it's a conversation that you all can have amongst yourselves of whether or not it makes sense to kind of grab these goals and hold on to them or to recommend different numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, this is Joey. There was legislation passed last year that basically 100% of third graders will be proficient in reading or they will be held back by the 2022-23 school year. That was at the last session. So just that's what the expectation is, and if not met, students can be held back as third graders. Now they're working on some different measures to get to that, but that's a 22-23 goal.
That's good context. In terms of post-secondary and workforce development goals that the state has, and again, these are in kind of federal plans and the Perkins plan, which is their CTE plan, and then the higher education master plan that we pulled these from. But by 2024, Tennessee will double the number of Tennessee learners who participate in high quality work-based learning experiences and attain relevant credentials and/or degrees needed to meet the workforce demands of Tennessee. So again, a baseline starting in 2020, doubling through 2024. By 2024, substantially increase the number of students accessing aligned pathways, participating in high quality learning experiences, and on track to meet post-secondary goals 2 years after graduation. Again, as measured by 2- and 4-year college persistence, technical certificate attainment, military enlistment, workforce participation, other similar pathways that come after high school. The Drive to 55 goal, by 2025, 55% of Tennesseans will possess a college degree or certificate. And then also the goal of increasing the proportion of students enrolling in degree programs that lead to employment in high need fields. So there are, the state does a report of kind of high need fields. Some of those, for example, are software developers, medical, dental, and physical therapist assistants, biological technicians, et cetera. And so increasing that 5% annually. Questions about these? All right, so with that context in mind, I think what I would love to have a conversation about and hear from commissioners on is, given what's already in place, how do you all want to think about creating metrics? And we put a couple of different options up here. There are probably other options as well that we can consider, but I think there's an opportunity to point the legislature to these existing goals and metrics and make a recommendation that they use them as success metrics for the relevant ERIC recommendations that they adopt. I think that you all could think about selecting a subset of the existing goals and metrics and making recommendations for the legislature to use them. You could add to them, or you could create a completely new set of metrics. And so would love to just open up the floor to conversation about where people are wanting to go with the success metrics. Are we wanting to kind of adopt and recommend some of what already exists? Are we wanting to add to it? Are we wanting to start from scratch?
The floor is open for comment on that.
Kelly,
I think we should, I'm sorry.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think we should review and then add to, because we want to get better. So, you know, and make any recommendations or changes to the existing metrics.
I'm sorry, Yolanda, repeat that. I missed part of it. It like went in and out for me.
And I apologize, I'm having some sinus issues, everyone. So my hearing and my it's a little off, I think, today. But I would love to look at the current metrics and add to them or make recommendations to change them.
Glenn, what was your comment?
I was going to say, I really applaud us for taking this on. This is the essence of what, you know, want to inspect what we expect here, as I use this term. And it strikes me there's going to be certain process metrics, very small number of, you know, for example, like students drop out, students are going to college going rate. And then there'll be more numerous, what I would call in-process metrics around that. And Yolanda, this could be something, you know, like for students that have access to TCAT, you know, things like that. That would be a key in-process metric. Percent that are on literacy and numeracy. I hope we don't just stop it to third grade. I hear from industry they unfortunately have to hire sometime students that are not they're not literate and they're not literate. They can't compute numbers, etc. So I know the Department of Education has a pretty robust set of their report card is something we ought to everybody look at. I found it very interesting to look at the report card. So I would support, you know, taking a look at what we want done. What is our recommendations? And hopefully some of these that we've already got will fit right in there nicely overall.
Any other comments? Joey or Dolores? So I'm kind of in the same, Dolores, did you have something? No. Oh, the challenges of WebEx. So, you know, in looking at these, I'd like to spend some more quality time with them, but also thinking about what we put together in the report, it strikes me that there could be some that would still be applicable to what we're talking about in our recommendations, but I think it could be alternative ones to include as well. I think a wise person once said, what gets measured gets done. And so we've got to be able to think about, if we're making these recommendations, what are the measures that we want to put out there? What's our goal? What's our vision? Where do we want to be in 10 years? And I think that probably a little bit more thoughtful discussion on what those measures might be. And I think there's some that you know, are in here that probably would still make sense. And people have certainly spent a good amount of time coming up with what those numbers should be. I believe that there could be some other ones that we might want to consider. We also don't want to over metric ourselves to death. So how do we create a simple dashboard that could have a variety of inputs, where, you know, something that we could look at either on an annual basis or however often makes sense, where we could understand whether the recommendations are successful or not. That's food for thought.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just on a couple of things related to this process, you know, we will have just come out with a report that calls for some pretty big transformational things. we will have said every student in this state needs to be able to do TCAT and community college at the same time that they're in high school. We will have said that every class at the high school level needs to have a CLEP test or an ability for a student to move quickly through. If then in the next report, we say the way we measure that is what's already out there about increasing it 2% or 3% a year, then we'll be kind of coming back against what we've said before. And the other sort of thing is that, you know, the commission, well, I think and members probably need to realize that the plain reality of it is that whatever does get picked by 17 senators and 50 House members to become law and then get implemented, you know, 5 years later, basically, after they've seen what some of the effect of it is, then there will be the opportunity for them to measure and make those decisions. It won't ultimately be what this commission is into. Now, that doesn't mean you don't say the commission recommends you know, a policy audit after so many years of the implementation of each of these. It's just a matter of yeah, we're doing this big call, this big sort of visionary call here. Wouldn't we want whatever it is we're asking for in the next report to be equally supportive of this larger vision, rather than, yes, if we're doing 2% more on an annual basis, in 50 years, we'll get to the 100%.
Yeah, so just to be clear, Nathan, when I'm talking about metrics, I'm talking about whether, for example, are we increasing literacy rate? I'm not talking about numbers. And I think that, to your point, totally agree with you. Incrementality is not going to help resolve the challenges we have with the current generation of kids. We have to think about things from a transformative standpoint. And so I 100% agree with what you're saying. Thank you for the perspective. I think Dolores is trying to talk, but we can't hear her.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I think the point is really well made that if we call for a renaissance and then nickel dime it, you know, it doesn't match up. So whatever the vision is, then the way to get there has got to meet the size of the vision, as it were. So let's not nickel dime it.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? So Kelly, it sounds like we're moving forward. We need to have some intentional conversations about what really is going to make sense from this commission.
Yep. And what I would love to do is, well, you can tell me if this makes sense or not, but have this chart together thinking about what is the end goal that you all are thinking about, and what are some of the categories of goals that in metrics that you all could come up with. For example, employment or workforce participation, annual wages, voter participation, what post-secondary categories, and then what K-12 categories. And I would love to spend just a little bit of time refining this bullet point list with you all. So then we can go back in the next couple of months before the February meeting and come up with, make sure we're aligning with what already exists, pulling some examples from other states, and putting some draft actual metrics in front of you all so that we can then narrow from there. But would love to just have a conversation about what the categories might be today that you all are interested in. Does that feel like an okay next step? Okay, I'm gonna take this out of present.
Okay.
Can you all still see? I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger so I can edit in real time here. Okay. So starting with this question of what is the end goal for all of these recommendations, would love input on what the categories are that you all want to measure. These are draft, I can delete them, can add to them, etc. What are the categories you're thinking about in terms of measuring the ideal end goal? Where do we want kids to be once they've completed post-secondary?
This is Glenn. I would certainly hope that it's about jobs and careers and successful lives. So, you know, how many jobs are we staffing? How often does an employer have to go outside of Tennessee to staff a job? So I would hope that that's what we're measuring here, jobs and people that become taxpayers and contribute to the wealth of the state.
So measuring something like how often employers can find Tennessee students or individuals, I guess,
Yep.
to fill open roles.
Or you could reverse it and say, how often can they not? You know, so we should have zero defects. We intend to staff all jobs with Tennessee students, you know, that are, we ought to have candidates for all jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I would add to that, and I'm thinking about my graduates myself. We have to make sure that, you know, with this alignment, you know, from education to jobs, that we're looking at our employees and also discussing with the employers that when our students graduate with entry-level skills, that they are not then requiring 1 to 3 years of experience before they can be employed. And that's a gap that kind of needs to be filled. And they should look at skill attainment and give students more of an opportunity than setting goal. You know, if you graduate from college, whether it be a community college, technical college, 4-year university, there has to be an expectation that these students may not have 3 years of work experience in the field, but they are equipped to do the job. So I would like to see that somehow, that partnership and those discussions being made between the institutions and the employers as well.
Absolutely agree.
Does this bullet point that I drafted here kind of capture that the skill attainment aligns with entry-level job requirements?
Perfect.
Yeah, great. Okay.
That'll help us as we try to find more opportunities for students to apply learning while they're in school, you know, do internships, come with a AA degree, et cetera, et cetera. So great idea.
On the other ones that you had put in there is kind of things to think about. I think it's impossible for us to guarantee any sort of annual wages. Unless someone has a different thought about that, I think that really has to come down to the business community making a decision on how they choose to pay. Now, should we be increasing, you know, pay across the state? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't know. I don't know that that really is something that is an area that we would engage in. When it comes to voter participation, I would broaden it a little bit to say civic engagement. By that, I mean, to point about Glenn mentioned earlier, you know, someone that is feeding back into the community, someone that is civically involved from a voting standpoint, who is engaged with with paying taxes, with getting being participatory in their community. I'm sure there's a better, more eloquent way of stating what I was just stating. But the concept behind that is a broader civic engagement. And I feel like the employment/workforce participation, I think that's important too. But there's a level of, you know, how do you inspire people to stay in the workforce? And that might be a Department of Labor conversation.
On the wage standpoint, can we look at maybe competitive wage along with a livable wage? I will say that I am seeing students that are veering toward higher wages. So some of our programs that have been pristine in the past, if the employer is paying less, those students are not necessarily going toward jobs now that are paying $15 and $16 an hour when they can get 30 in another field. So I think there should be some type of connection with wage attainment and just the outcomes for that. And making it competitive, you know.
And we can do some research between now and February and come back to you with some potential examples of how to actually capture this. I think it's good to have on the list as a category for the time being.
There's some really great metrics already out there around, for example, percent of students that graduate on time, within the time frame. So I really like the idea of looking at all the metrics that exist today and which ones do we align with here.
You're talking post-secondary on-time graduation?
Yep.
I would also hope that we think about with TCATs being the exception, but on-time graduation nowadays, Glenn, you probably know this, but it's 6 years for a 4-year degree and it's 3 years for a 2-year degree. I would propose that we try to
Hope we
go
modify
back to
that.
4 and 2-year degree as opposed to the 6 and 3-year.
I agree.
That's how it's measured. That's how it's measured. Yeah. But I mean, and it goes right into your recommendation in terms of the 15 to finish, doesn't it? I mean, that's right there. It's 2 years for 2 years and 4 years for 4-year degree.
I would hope, and I know this is a slippery slope, I would hope that we could somehow understand the voice of the students, that we can understand the voice of the frontline teachers. What are they saying? What's going on? Could be as simple as positive ratings.
The teachers or the students, Glenn?
Both. I really would encourage, and again, this comes from my industry background. You always understand what the customers are having to say and also understand what your frontline salespeople are having to say. So it seems to me the same concepts would work here. What do students think? My observation is they've lost interest by and large in education. Some people would argue we're not where we need to be with our teachers. It's probably some combination, but how do we measure their interest? It could be dropout rates. We measure dropout rates. How many students just disappear?
I think.
Yep. Go ahead, Dolores. Sorry. Hey, Dolores, we can't hear you for some reason.
I think Glenn is on something here. I realize that historically the legislature does not involve itself in specific coursework, whether it's K through or a curriculum, whether it's K through 12 or higher ed. But it's like Glenn says, what are they learning? Some folks are graduating from college thinking that the government is the answer to everything, and sometimes that is not true at all. In fact, most of the time it's not true at all. So you have to look at what is it that we are actually communicating to students in order to get to our goal, which, as Glenn says, to be productive in the work world, and as our chairman keeps talking about, it has significant civic engagement. So the question is, what are they learning? What are we teaching them? And we need to look at that as part of this next year's report. I think we have to do a deep dive into what exactly our college students are learning, and not specifically in the major courses, in the advanced courses that a student may choose when they choose a major, but what are they getting at the very beginning? Are they getting Econ 101? Is that required? Are they getting American history? Are they getting sufficient civic education? Are they really getting the nuts and bolts of composition and American literature and those kinds of things that are foundational to future success? So, as I said, historically we don't get into that, but I think that's something we have to get into.
Thank you, Senator. And that's definitely on our list of topics to tackle next time, or in the next couple of meetings. So it's on our list, and look forward to that conversation. I think, what I was hearing earlier in this conversation is a desire to have a relatively small number of very aspirational metrics And so just, as we look particularly at that top box that Kelly's working on, are there big categories that we haven't identified there that align to what you all would envision is true 10 years from now? If about the state, about students, if the legislature adopts the majority or all of Eric's recommendations.
Jen, this is Glenn. I would, along that line, I would encourage us to look at our 9 overarching goals that we've teed up. And each one of those, what are some specific metrics or metric that we would recommend? Like I would take number 3 around teachers and investing in teachers. Based on what Amy was sharing with us today, it's very hard for a person that comes from a wonderful, successful career in industry to come in here and teach any class we've got. So is there a way that we could kind of measure some of those kind of things? But anyway, the message is look at each of the 9 goals and find out, maybe we have a very small number of key metrics, but we used to call them in industry. Then beside that, you have the key process, in process, they call them in process metrics or goals. Just a thought.
Yep, I like that, making sure they're clearly tied to those 9 priority areas.
I would visualize having it, the 9 goals overarching, and in under each of those, here are the key metrics that we expect to measure out of that.
Yep.
Well, specifically, I would hope that we could, in 5 years, I would hope, repeal the sales program. Because the sales program is just one big crutch that we're using to absolve high school instructors to not be proficient or effective in their coursework and their teaching. So if we could look at that as a specific goal, that would no longer be needed. And I think there was a paragraph in the year 2 report that was really, really excellent about remediation costs big bucks. And it would be really good that if youngsters who report in for the freshman year in post-secondary, whatever that be, whether it be a TCAT or community college in particular, would not require remediation.
Yep. And I think that goes hand in
That
hand
would
with
be-
the on-time graduation rates too.
That would be a major step forward. Yeah.
And I would like to also bring into the discussion, for me, it's about alignment. I know outcomes is what we really look at, and when students take tests, or even I'm thinking about our teachers. They're going to school, and they're getting great grades, but when it comes down to taking the practice, they can't pass it. To me, that's not a reflection on that they're not learning. It's just that what they're learning does not align to them passing the praxis. So when we go from secondary to post-secondary, it's not for me to say that the high schools are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but I'm thinking it's not aligning with our expectations. So I think a lot of these problems could be solved if we could align what we're doing based on outcomes. And those are discussions, if we all come together and have these discussions, we could create an incredible pipeline of success for our students, and without doing the blame game, because I think everyone is working very, very hard. We're just not working together to get the same outcomes. So alignment for me is key, and whatever we can do to get those, if it's to pass the practice, if it's to get a job. If you go to college, to me, and you're spending that kind of money, I want a job when I graduate. I want to be able to be employed when I graduate, when I just spent $50,000. So it's not always just about, I think that just should be something that is an expectation. So
Yolanda, as always, you're right on point. And perhaps we rename this, instead we have these are outcomes. What are the desired outcomes that we have? And there should be a small number of that. And then the other things are what I would call in-process metrics that would subtend to that. But the key is, outcomes. So I like that idea.
So I think what makes sense as a next step for us then is to draft some metrics that are, or outcome metrics that are related to each of the 9 categories or priorities that are in that year 2 report, and potentially some kind of sub metrics under each of those that are aligned to some of the specifics, and get those in front of you in January leading up to the February meeting, so we can have a conversation about them and start to figure out which makes sense, some that we might want to eliminate if we need to add others. Does that sound like a good set of next steps? So using this bullet pointed list as a starting point, but not kind of the end all be all.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, we'll take that as our next step then. That is actually the end of our agenda. I don't know, Chair Scarlett or Jen, if either of you has other things to say, but that is our immediate next step. We'll take that back. And if there's nothing else, we can give you some time back this morning.
Any other business from the commissioners? No? Okay. Well, with that, 2 things, Kelly and team, as we think about our February meeting, I think metrics are always things that we need to spend some quality time thinking about. So I think it'd be really valuable if we could have some of these ideas and any sort of other backup provided to us more than 1 week in advance of our next meeting, just so we all have a chance to spend some quality time thinking about it. I think that's a lot of rich discussion when it comes to how we want to measure what we're putting together. I think it's the right thing for us to do. I just want to make sure we all have some good, thoughtful time to think about it before getting together and having a further conversation in February. And especially, Joey, since I know that you will not be with us in February, I'd like to get your perspective included in the conversation in advance. And so that becomes really important as well. Of course, we will not finalize anything until, well, I don't know what we're going to finalize in February, but I'd like to get your input. I think that'd be really valuable.
Yeah, we'll aim for no less than 2 weeks to get you all something in advance. And then Joey, we'll make sure we schedule some one-on-one time with you so that we can incorporate your feedback and bring it to the rest of the commission during that meeting.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, with that, I wish you all a very, very happy holiday season, whatever your holidays are going to take you, wherever you're going to go. Please be safe and healthy and have a lot of celebrating. And with that, we are adjourned. Bye, y'all.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas.
See ya.
Happy New Year.
Holidays. Merry Christmas.
Bye.